Good evening, and welcome to DTV, the Democratic Voice on community television here in East Tennessee. My name is John Stewart, a Democrat for more years than I care to mention. My co-host this evening is Doug Veum, who is now the principal producer of DTV. And with Doug and me is Becky Wade, an old friend who's been around about as long as I have, probably even longer, who is the Community Development Director for the City of Knoxville, a position that is really important as to how this city functions. So we're delighted to have Becky with us this evening. She really knows what she's talking about. And as we try to understand what the recently proposed federal budget means for Knoxville, along with other cities across the U.S., we could not have a better person than Becky Wade. Let me say right now, it is just impossible to cover this topic in a half hour. So that's just impossible. But it is possible, I hope, to make some basic points that will help interested citizens make sense of what's happening or what's not happening. We expect to cover other elements of the proposed federal budget in future DTV shows. Doug Veum, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things, John, that I'd like to make sure that we covered both today and in subsequent shows is the fact that one of the impacts that I see of the budget cuts is that it just moves the federal government away from those of us who it touches. In other words, it gets further away because they're cutting the programs that are closest to the things that matter to us. And I hope that we can, in our discussion this morning, this afternoon, or evening, excuse me, that we will have we'll touch on that.
Yeah.
You know, on the importance of, on how human these cuts or the impact on humans that these cuts will have. Yeah.
And I've said before on other DTV segments that this is not a Q&A session. This is a discussion, and so that's what we're looking forward to having with Becky. And Becky will give us all the details and keep us on track. But it is hopefully going to be a discussion. So let me just start by saying, Becky, if you could boil down all the details of the budget, and the budget is, like this, into a few words, how would you characterize what the Trump budget has proposed in fiscal year 2018 in the areas that you're responsible for?
Okay, I'll be happy to talk about that. It's the City of Knoxville receives federal funding for a number of programs that are designed locally by the city based on the needs here. And the sources of funds come through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and those are Community Development Block Grant funding, home funding, which is actually Home Investment Partnership Program, and then Emergency Solutions Grants, and those are focused on homeless activities. The budget, which is proposed for 2018, the President's budget, would not affect the City of Knoxville until July 1st of 2018, since we run slightly behind the federal budget. And the President's budget calls for the Community Development Block Grant and the home funds to be completely eliminated.
Right, just zeroed out.
Zeroed out. Those are the primary sources of funds that our department, Community Development at the City of Knoxville, uses to assist families and low-income individuals with a number of different activities. So first and foremost, housing rehabilitation would be severely affected. We have several programs. One is operated by Community Action Committee, and that's for minor repairs for lower income homeowners. Those are things like a roof repair, a plumbing system, heat and air system, electrical, windows, something that is around $2,000 to $3,000 that a homeowner cannot afford to do, but makes a huge impact on whether they're able to stay in the house, the energy efficiency of the home. It affects their neighbors when properties start to decline. So that's one of the programs that we fund that would be eliminated.
Can I ask you a question about that? not only will it then affect those who live in the house that's deteriorating, that can't be repaired, but who repairs that and who gets paid and what happens to the next step.
Right. There are numerous small contractors that are employed through our programs that hire individuals to do work in these houses. And when those programs are gone, these sorts of jobs will be cut.
The physical condition of homes in a particular neighborhood is very important as to whether that neighborhood's going to flourish or whether it's going to decline. And anybody who owns a house knows you keep putting off maintenance things long enough, it just builds and builds, and the hole gets deeper and deeper to the point at which the homeowner simply can't even consider it.
Right.
And then you're sort of off to the races in terms of what happens to that house, and then what happens to the house next to that house. And so this is really important stuff.
Right.
So you're talking about the domino effect that happens when something, when a particular property goes bad, the impacts around it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Much of what we do is neighborhood stabilization, whether it's through repair, home repair, through this program that I just spoke about, or our whole house rehab program, which is a loan program for homeowners to bring their entire home up to code. They're able to stay there many more years, makes the home very energy efficient. It's an asset to pass along to their children. So it builds wealth. And then other programs that we do is property acquisition of blighted properties, things that the neighborhoods really, really have a difficult time dealing with.
Now, if I was the director of the Office of Management and Budget today, I would say to you, okay, big deal, these are all nice things. Why doesn't the private sector do them?
Well, the private sector can't make any money doing these, so they're not going to do these. The city can do some things, but the city has other obligations to its citizens. It's got health and safety, police, fire, streets, all those things that cities have to do. So these funds are seriously needed, and eliminating them is not a positive move for the citizens of Knoxville, and it's not a positive move for the citizens of the United States.
I was going to say, what if we would mandate a minimum wage of, say, $15 or $18 an hour, so that those people who are living in those houses would have enough income to do the work that you just described is going to go away? Would that be a solution?
Well, that would help.
That would
Certainly
help.
would help.
Are we? I don't hear much. I don't hear much from this administration about asking for that. I mean, the point is that if you don't have the money and you've got to have a place to live, and if you don't have enough money to pay for the whole kit and caboodle of it, the whole everything about it, you need some help. This is what this is. And it's directed at specific things, isn't it?
Right. It is very directed, and the good thing about the Community Development Block Grant, which was started in 1974, it was a Gerald Ford initiative, was a bipartisan initiative, is very locally controlled.
So Gerald Ford was president in 1974, 5, and 6?
Yep.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Long time ago.
But I remember it very well. Seems just like yesterday.
Yeah, I do.
This is a very long-standing program that cities depend on, basically.
And it's been supported by Republican administrations
Yes.
and Democratic administrations.
Right.
And anybody who knows that cities are built essentially on neighborhoods. And the vitality of neighborhoods, and neighborhoods are different, and they should be different, and that's what makes a city a vital, interesting place. But the neighborhoods have to be able to maintain a certain physical level of their buildings, and you get into educational issues, and you get into health issues, but all of those have neighborhood dimensions. We're not going to talk about those others this evening, although Doug, we got to talk about education in a future program, and of course, health continues to be an enormous issue, which we need to get to.
Well, what she's just said about the impact of taking these block grants away is that it's just like I said earlier, it's moving the federal government away from where it really can have an impact and where we really know about it. I mean, it leaves us essentially stranded on our own.
Right.
You know?
Well, we know we know that the private sector is not going to pick up this work because it's not a profit-making activity, although it's a very important activity. How about the state? Is the state going to step up and fill in the gap?
The state gets an allocation of these block grants as well and distributes those to smaller cities that have needs. So they likewise will be without this
Right.
money.
Yeah.
So if they're going to do this, it's got to come from some other source.
Right. It seems to me that what the private sector isn't able to do is they aren't able to initiate and pay for the work. But the fact is that the private sector receives the money. I mean, the contractor who does the repair, the contractor who builds the building, the contractor who does the kind of work that you're buying with your block grant, is a private citizen and a private contractor and a private entrepreneur. So I mean, it isn't so much that the private sector won't do it; it's that there needs to be some way of funding that.
Right.
And you either pay.
Well, yeah,
higher,
they'll do it if you pay them. That's
Exactly
right.
right. If you have a higher wage, just general across the board, a higher wage, so that these things can happen, or you do what you're talking about. It seems to me, from an efficiency standpoint, what you do is a very efficient way of keeping a city in good condition, keeping people in safe and adequate housing, and keeping a lot of electricians and a lot of carpenters and a lot of plumbers working.
Talk about what maybe makes sense in Knoxville doesn't make sense in Cookeville. Cookeville's got something else going.
Yeah.
Chattanooga's got something else going.
Right. That's one thing about these funds they're very flexible.
Yeah.
They're based on a community's needs. So the community designs the program that is going to be met with these needs. We do that based on conversations with many different people, with the public, with service providers, and also looking at data. For example, in the last year or so, we've found that there is a affordable housing shortage of rental properties. And so we have been directing a large portion of our funds to help develop affordable rental housing. And so we're responsive to the needs of our community and lay out in our plan what we're going to do. And the same thing happens all over the country. So these funds serve the actual community need, and they're very well targeted.
And the specific, as John pointed out, the specific community need. Cookeville may have different
Absolutely.
needs. They have a different mechanism. They have different people. But this was focused for Chattanooga. I mean, for Knoxville. You know what Knoxville needs. Yeah.
But by the same token, these are federal tax dollars.
Yeah.
And the federal taxpayers have a reasonable right to assume they're going to be spent wisely. There are certain criteria you
Absolutely.
meet, right?
Yes,
You
they do.
They just don't come by and dump a basket of money in Madeline Rahero's lap.
No,
Right.
there are certainly
Becky Wade's.
regulations
Yeah.
and restrictions on the funding. It is focused on low to moderate income neighborhoods or families. There's certain things that you cannot do with the money. But within those parameters, each community can design their own plan to best spend them so that they meet the needs.
Well, why don't, I've got an idea. Why don't we just raise everybody's taxes here in Knoxville
Right.
and raise enough money to take over these programs? Isn't that a good idea?
Yeah, I can't answer that.
We need a councilman for that, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
We all know
Right.
that's not going to happen. Maybe the state will raise it.
Correct.
Maybe the state will start an income tax. There's a great idea.
There you go.
They'll fill in all these gaps with an income tax.
Well-
I'm sure everybody in Tennessee is very enthusiastic
Right.
about
Right.
that.
Right. Well, that leads to a point, John, that all of the if all of this money goes away, as we're talking about it, and your grants, the two grants you're talking about, are absolutely zero.
Zeroed.
Zero. I mean, it's not a matter of
How much are we getting right now?
In the current year, we a little over $1 million in community development block grant, 1.3 million. In home, it's right at about 800,000,
Yeah.
which is not near what the city of Knoxville used to get. We have been cut drastically over the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, 10 years ago, what would you say? the budget would be?
10 years ago, it was, let's see, I looked up what it was in 2000,
Oh, that's
and
good.
it was 2.3 million in CDBG, so that was another $1 million than what we're getting now, and home was at 1.3 million.
So
So
almost twice.
as much
Yeah,
as we
yeah,
have now.
yeah.
And fortunately, our city has helped. As we've lost federal funding, our city has stepped up with local dollars to help fund some of our programs that we weren't able to do with federal dollars. That's not able to happen in every community.
Well, our state is going to suffer as a state if these go away, because we, as a state, get more money from the federal government than we pay in taxes, and so there's a deficit.
So there's more coming back than is going out.
Yeah, exactly. So we are going to relieve the burden on New York, because they won't have to pay us any longer, and we won't have that money that they have.
Right.
Is what really happens. I don't think people understand that. The fact is that there's a lot of money coming to us that goes away if these things go away, and to replace them, we pay for them ourselves.
And,
Right.
and Tennessee is third in the nation
Yeah.
in terms of its dependency on the federal government. And these are, you know, the way to think about them, I've always thought, was these are investments. If you fix your home up and if you preserve the neighborhood, that is an investment in the future.
Right.
And if labels sometimes matter. You just talk about spending. People have the notion of dollar bills being thrown out the window and so forth. But if you're investing the money in activities that are sound, that are evaluated, that are improved as you go along, all of those things have happened in these areas. This is not some wacko idea that just suddenly popped up. It's been around for many, many years, and it's been very, very effective.
Sure is. Well, housing is not always thought of as an infrastructure item, but it is. It's part of the infrastructure of a city. I mean, where people live, the condition it's in, how much of it's available. I mean, these are the same kinds of investments as you're making your sewer system, your road system, all of these things. And I think that's not clearly understood either. I mean, this is, as John says, this is an investment. This is not just spending money. It's spending money on something that's going to stay there.
Right.
When you repair the windows of a house, they last a long time. That's a nice investment. Yes, it's a repair, but it's also an investment in the future.
Exactly.
You know, what would be a project that we can look at besides the housing issues that you're talking about that may not have happened in Knoxville had we not had an infusion of federal monies to make it happen? I mean, I'm thinking things like Market Square development, or I know you were in a housing development. What are some of those projects that wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have had this catalyst?
I think what helped the downtown get started with its revitalization was the fact that the City of Knoxville was awarded an empowerment zone grant
Right.
in 1998.
I remember that very well.
Yes, and with that came new market tax credits that were used. There were many business loans made to small businesses that started on Market Square. Those were made with empowerment zone funds. I'm not saying that it would not have happened, but I think that the fact that the City of Knoxville got empowerment zone funds helped, certainly helped. Urge the development on.
Well, the simple availability of money to do that meant that somebody who was smart enough to say, there's a pot of $1 million, how do I get my hands on it? Well, if I do something to improve Market Square, I get some of that money. That's that's really what's happening, right?
Right.
It
was incentives.
Yeah, that's right. And there the private sector works because there's money available.
Right.
And they're looking at it and say, how do I get that?
Take a minute and talk a little bit about the homeless dimension of all this.
Yeah, we get a very small amount of money from the state. I mean, it's certainly not insignificant, but around $165,000 comes to the City of Knoxville. Emergency Solutions grants, and those are federal as well. And those go to organizations that assist homeless families, primarily with things like paying deposits so that they can get into a place to live, or providing dental care at a dental clinic, helping a family with an issue with an electric bill so that they don't get evicted, prevention.
And if they don't pay their electric bill, who suffers? The electric company that isn't getting paid, right? As much. In other words, it isn't just the family that doesn't get the electricity. The company who provided that doesn't get paid either.
Right,
You
but
know,
then, ultimately, if you don't have electricity,
It's the
you can't
neighborhood.
stay there.
Oh, yeah,
And
oh,
then
yeah,
once
yeah.
again, it's the neighborhood.
Right.
But yeah, so we provide those funds to organizations like Volunteer Ministry Center, the YWCA, Salvation Army, and they're small grants, but they are vital
Right.
to helping people who are at the very bottom of the economic
Right.
rung,
Right.
not just end up destitute. So
But
it's-
they aren't the. My point is that they are not the only ones who receive the benefit. In other words, they benefit from what is paid for. It's electric bill to remain in the house or whatever it is. But that payment is also made to somebody else. I mean, there's a step,
Yes.
another step, and another step, and I think we sometimes really forget that. I mean, in other words, taking care of the homeless sure helps the homeless person, but you know what else? It helps the person who's also providing the services, providing the housing, providing whatever it is. In Villa, there's somebody who's getting a benefit from in Villa besides the people who are living in it. You know, how about the contractor who refurbished it?
Sure.
You know.
What are some of the current projects when you depart this hallowed studio? What are some of the projects that you go back on your desk and worry about?
We're very excited to be able to assist with a privately developed property development that's going in South Knoxville. It's on Martin Mill Pike. It's on East Martin Mill, which is behind the new Bojangles off
Okay.
Chapman Highway. But a private developer that develops low-income housing will be doing 167 units.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
There of affordable housing. They're using low-income housing tax credits through the state, which is another program that is funded by the federal government. And then our funds, our home funds, and our community development block grant will help fill a gap in that development so that this can happen. This is really needed. We see this as a great opportunity because of the location. It's in the south waterfront area. It will really help complement the market rate housing that's going in on the old Baptist Hospital site. And so we'll create some mixed income there. So provide housing for people who work in the neighborhood and downtown.
Provide some benefit to the transportation system.
Yes, so on the bus lines.
Yeah, okay.
Boy, affordable housing is really important.
Absolutely.
The the Stewart family lived in Washington for a while, and we never sold our home in Washington when we moved here. But if you want to buy a home today in Washington, forget it.
Yeah, I get
I mean, just forget it. You know. I mean, for those of us who happen to own one, I mean, for us that's probably a good thing, or at least it's a good thing for our children, maybe. But there are all sorts of younger couples, single people who would like to live in Washington.
Right.
And it's just almost impossible now to do that. And that's true in city after city.
Right. And the City of Knoxville is getting
expensive.
more and more expensive
Yeah, exactly.
to rent or
Well,
buy.
I know if you're downtown, one of the bigger developments that I see is Marble Square. Isn't that what it's called?
Marble
Yeah.
Alley.
Marble Alley, yeah. And I know some people who live in there and they love it. But what does
not
it cost?
affordable.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah.
can't afford it, you know. So I don't want to afford it. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So what other things have you that you can look back on in terms of developments or just really things that benefited the community as a whole that maybe at the time didn't appear that they were going to do that you're kind of proud of? What are the
The commercial facade improvement program was started in our office with empowerment zone funds back in 2006.
Okay.
It was then funded with Community Development Block Grant, and now it's funded with local dollars. But those are forgivable loans to commercial business owners that typically they might own a vacant building. Provides an opportunity for a new business to come in. We did this in the downtown north area, central Broadway area. Many new businesses have come in there as a result of the commercial facade improvement program, and that leverages many dollars of private investment because all we can do is the outside, a maximum of $50,000. The business owner refurbishes the inside, does all the other improvements, brings a business in, creates jobs, creates economic opportunities for that neighborhood, and we're doing those. We've done over 150 of those jobs.
Commercial buildings.
Since 2006.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that they were modernized, that they were fixed so that they were maybe put doors in different places? What we focused on initially was really bringing back the historic character to the buildings that were there.
Depending on the building, different things are done, but a lot of times what we do is take off some things that were added maybe in the 70s or 80s on the outside and discover lovely things underneath.
And like Market Square used to be with those god-awful mushroom things that were down there.
That's been a very successful program and leveraged many millions of dollars.
Yeah, I remember weren't there canopies over the sidewalks on Gay Street at one time? It was just really dark and ugly down there.
Oh, and dirty.
Dirty.
Dirty. The concept that some folks have a hard time grasping, but is at the heart of all this is that these are different levels of government. The private sector is almost always involved eventually, and that this sort of money is a catalyst. It brings these pieces together, and it makes the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, and it really works.
There's real synergy there.
I worked at TVA, and that's what we did in rural development areas. And without the TVA money, which was not a lot of money, but it was enough money to get the federal government involved, to get the state government involved, to get the private sector involved, and things happened that otherwise would not have happened. And this is a system that's working, and it's just a shame to see it proposed to be torn apart.
Right.
Somebody explain to me what the benefit of that is.
Can't figure that out. I have a personal experience with this. I grew up in an area where we did not have, in a rural area in western Minnesota, we did not have electricity until after World War II. And there were people near us who did because it just ran out before it got to us. But the point is that without the REA, without the Rural Electrification Association, farmers out there would not have had electricity because there was no way that any one farmer could afford to put it in. Now what it is, I mean, those places boom. The land is worth a lot more. There's no comparison. And yet I remember that. I remember the day that the REA came to our farm and they were going to put my dad was just so excited. So I mean, those things just happen.
The public sector invests in the infrastructure, private sector invests in the rest.
Well, anyway, we could talk a lot more about this, but you do run out of time on these enterprises, and we're about to run out of time here. And I want to thank Becky Wade for sharing her perspective and her knowledge and experience with us. And we're going to be looking at other critical areas in the coming weeks, like education and family assistance and arts. And so we hope you'll come back and stick with us on this. We're trying to make you help it, for all of us understand it better. Thanks and good night.